Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. I mean, I can give you a quick bio myself right now. I've been, I came to Canada almost a quarter of a century ago, so I've been in the West for a long time. So kind of grew up
Okay.
here, went to high school here, did my university. I'm a software engineer by profession. I finished also my master degree in business administration, so I have an MBA with a focus on market and business development. I also, alhamdulillah, have a Sharia degree in the Bachelors in Islamic Studies, both Islamic and Arabic Studies. And alhamdulillah, right now I'm finishing my master degree in Fiqh and Usul Fiqh. Alhamdulillah, I finished mostly all my coursework, and I'm just focusing right now on my thesis. And hopefully within a year, inshallah, I should graduate from my master degree with Allah Ta'ala.
Inshallah. It goes
I
well.
am
A lot of
the,
stuff, mashallah.
Allah barik fikum. I am the founder of the I3 Institute, which is, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, one of the fastest growing Islamic institutes in Canada. So we're not just purely academic. We mix the academic with the practical. We try to build leaders instead of just basically people with knowledge. Meaning, basically, we try. I call it basically we try to build Islamic engineers, people who understand Islam and can put it to practice in different contexts and within the community work. So, alhamdulillah, we do da'wah training. We have new Muslim support teams across the city. We started something new called the Faith Crisis Support Group, which is basically a team focused on youth faith issues and trying to answering these questions and issues related to faith and all aqidah and non-aqidah issues. So alhamdulillah, we have classes in 12 cities in the province of Ontario, which has around 2/3 of the Muslims in Canada reside in this province. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. So our reach is pretty wide, and the whole thing is a volunteer effort. Nobody gets paid. We have a philosophy that no teachers of Islam should be paid money for teaching Islam. And I personally have been teaching Islam for 15 years, and alhamdulillah subhanahu wa ta'ala never charged a single dime. And all the other teachers, we have 13 teachers right now in the institute. Nobody gets paid for teaching Islam. Also, we have another.
Mashallah.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. We have another thing, basically, which we're also known for, that we provide most of our services, especially Islamic studies, at free. So we don't charge our students. The institute basically grow big now. We might start charging something symbolic, but we provide basically very accessible, programs. People who can't pay, basically, tell them forget it. You don't have to pay anything. It's just you can join for free. Bismillah ta'ala.
I think we'll just get into the episode then, inshallah, because you already gave your intro. So, assalamu alaikum, listeners. Sheikh Osta just gave a beautiful intro and explained what the I3 Institute does, because I was actually going to ask him that. So, you actually mentioned that I was surprising that you don't actually charge your students and you don't profit from it. So, how do you function? Like, how does the institute run then?
Well, this is the biggest question. Everybody asks me this question. So alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, we first of all, when I started this several years ago, I mean there's something called there's another institute, or like kind of a pilot project, which was before the I3 Institute. So we've been running for a long time. The way we did it is basically low or zero cost. Utilizing the internet, utilizing accessible resources. Whether in the city we book community library rooms, or mostly right now basically in the masajid. So we create partnerships. Basically, we create partnerships. Alhamdulillah, our masajid are many. The city of Toronto has over 200 masjid and musalla. So, alhamdulillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have lots of buildings. And I think the utilization of these structures have been a little bit on the lower end. So we come and we create partnerships with many different organizations, and they host us, and we teach for free. So I think it's an amazing strategy that worked very well. It does take lots of negotiation skills and being able to really have a unifying mindset, number one, and then being able to extend your arms to different aspects of the community. We don't see people with their colors or nationality, and let alone that. Basically, we don't even see people with different madhahib. So we don't really care basically if the imam of this masjid or the community is Hanafi or Hanbali or Salafi or Sufi. It's not. That's not the point. The point is basically being able to see the goodness of others and being able to spread the word of Islam. Doesn't mean that basically we accept everything in the world. That's not that's not the point. We're very principled, alhamdulillah. The other, there's the word principle is very synonymous with ayat 3, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, which is another thing we can talk about. So it's not as if we compromise things. That's not the but being able not to compromise and still be able to unify. I mean, we are in different masajid that basically, if somebody knows we're in that masjid, he'd think we're of this background or this ideological slant or this specific madhab. But alhamdulillah, we're everywhere, which is very unique, alhamdulillah.
Okay, so yeah, I think it's a good point to sort of get into our discussion from here, since you just touched on like backgrounds and Salafis, that sort of madhab stuff. So this is really like the main topic that we wanted to discuss in this podcast. So, Sheikh, what is your sort of definition, or what's your I don't know what the word is, philosophy of like who's Ahlul Sunnah, as in who would you identify as Ahlul Sunnah?
Well, I wouldn't basically kind of approach the issue this way. I would basically, the way I approach it is a little bit differently. I think
Right.
we have a discourse, and this is unique, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. You can say basically this is where our original thinking now comes into play. We believe in the I3 Institute that the discourse has been set in the 20th century, or specifically, I'd love to speak only in Hijri, really, in the 14th Hijri century. Okay, right now it's 1440, right? We're days away from 1441. So in the last century, most of the Islamic movements came to be after the destruction of the Khilafah after World War I. Most of the Islamic work started to basically define itself. So unfortunately, with any amateurish type of effort to create anything, like even a service or a product, like even like a haircut or a new phone, whatever it is, the minute basically a person is a beginner, he or she will see things in a very singular way or one-dimensional way. So the way I see the Islamic movements, and I love all of them, I respect all of them. For sure, there's no generality, but basically in the holistic sense, each one focused on one aspect of Islam. So the way I see things is that, for example, the Salafi movement, may Allah bless them, focused on the purity of the Aqidah, also in the independence of the ijtihad from the sources of the directly from the sources, from text. So those two main features basically defined the Salafi movement. You have other movements like the Ikhwan al-Muslimun. What defined them is, because they were one of the earliest movements that kind of came on the scene in 1928, is the social work and the activism, and not necessarily politics. I think politics was a side effect, but mostly basically the tarbiyah, being able to build the human the human Muslim, basically the human individual, after the state lost its presence, and somebody had to basically take the task of building people that are effective in society, in addition to basically social activism within a social or societal context. Other movements, for example, Tabligh Jama'at, focused on the spiritual essence, with the very, very laser focused on the Salah, which is the most super important pillar in Islam, and that basically drove that movement. I believe the Sufi, tariqas from a perspective of activism, not a perspective of historical context, also focus in their usual, which is the akhlaq and the adab and the tazkiyah, which is the purification of the heart from a perspective of aqaid and perspective of human behavior. You have two more basically streams, which is the ulama. The ulama in general basically focus on the academia and the attainment of credentials within a formal study perspective. And you have basically Hizb al-Tahrir, since you guys are in Australia, if I'm not mistaken, they're pretty popular there. They focus on the politics of things, the intellectualism and the politics and so forth. So as you can see, every single movement had its focus. And I believe today in the 15th century Hijri, or the 21st century from a perspective of Gregorian calendar, which I don't really care about from an Islamic perspective. We need to see things in a 100-year perspective from a Hijri calendar because of the hadith of the Rasul. It's time for us today to basically start speaking about a holistic, fully integrated movement within the Ummah that meshes all the 6 positives of all the movements. So I don't see specifically the debate about who's Ahl Sunnah as something which is, pertinent to today's world, because we are a divided ummah. We are an ummah that has issues, and unfortunately, every decade and even every year we go from low to lower. So that's kind of the philosophy that we present and push. And alhamdulillah, it's pretty unique.
It sounds like you generally have a really, really big heart, and you have a very positive approach. And I really enjoyed sort of looking at your perspective on consolidating the positive effort. It's just like how Allah says in some places in the Quran, A'udhu billahi min shaitan rajim. What was that? I conveniently forgot. It was كل حزب بما لديهم فرحين أو فرحون in other place, right?
Correct.
So every group is pleased with what they have with themselves.
Exactly.
Right? So when you look at the whole ummah holistically, it's like a group of people trying to build a puzzle, and the puzzle is deen, and everyone's got some pieces of the deen in their hands, but everyone thinks they're the only ones who have some pieces and no one else has anything. But once we consolidate it all, like what the Sheikh was talking about, bringing everyone together, consolidating the positive effort, that's when you have the whole picture, right? So you mentioned a whole lot of things in there that, brought a lot of points into my mind. Like you mentioned compromise and, the different priorities of each group. Like Sufis are about tazkiyah, Salafis are about the purity of the creed and the independence of ijtihad. Where do you draw the line in terms of, just accepting everything, or drilling it down to this is right, this is wrong, and uniting upon common ground? You know what I mean? Because, for example, like muqallideen, right? People who follow madhabs, like, for example, myself,
Astaghfirullah.
I can only speak for myself, but I don't just follow Quran and Sunnah. I don't open up Sahih al-Bukhari and read a few ahadith and start following that, right? I follow ijtihad of Imam Abu Hanifa, and I don't access Quran and Sunnah exclusive of ijtihad, right? So where do you draw the line in terms of this is right, this is wrong, when it comes to methodology and creed specifically?
Sorry, before you answer that question, I just want to make it clear to the audience. Ramit's my new colleague.
I'm not a sheikh, by the way. I'm just
no, the sheikh that's on the podcast. But yeah, Ramit's new colleague, so it's an unfamiliar voice on the podcast. But yeah, just give me a quick intro. But yeah, go on, Sheikh. Sorry, if you could answer his question.
May Allah bless you. May Allah bless both of you. Wallahi, this is a very good question, actually. Alhamdulillah. I believe that this question needs to be figured out by the Ummah. And that means basically the scholars needs to start presenting solutions for this. Right now there's a divide. There's a bipolar dichotomy, really. There's people who reject the madhahib really outright, and they're there. And there are people who are strictly madhabi, meaning they would, again, put down any effort to do ijtihad outside the realm of the madhab. And they restrict it in a sense that almost basically you can't do much ijtihad in any way or shape. Now, I believe that this, the truth is somewhere in between. So now I'm going to give you my opinion, right? Like, alhamdulillah, I will present my view, but I don't want to force the ummah on the view. I think the ummah needs to converge on something within the next, hopefully, inshallah, decade or two. This is a big issue in the ummah. So I would say, personally, the way I envision it is that where the madhahib start structuring themselves a little bit more, and graduating real Shafi'i scholars, real Hanbali scholars, real Hanafi scholars that represent the madhab. And they start basically building schools all over the world. That's totally something that actually needs to happen. So if they're going to push the agenda of the madhab, that's fine. It's totally alhamdulillah. I mean, this is where we learn our fiqh from. But they need to build people who can actually do ijtihad and further in the madhab. Meaning the Shafi'i madhab should have an official stance on, for example, stocks, or foreign the forex, or I don't know, heart transplant, or whatever it is, issues basically, right? There has to be an official stance for that represents the madhab. Like you would ask, what is the Imam Shafi'i, what is the Shafi'i opinion on this, on let's say wudu? You want to now be able to do that. So this is one thing that those who push for the madhab restriction need to do. But I believe basically the Ummah needs to also have a leeway to create new madhab or new ijtihadat outside the realm of the four madhab. There's no problem with that. So from that end, I do see that the Salafi push has some positivity. But even though I do see basically, again, let's call it, I don't want to call it negativity, but basically limitation in both perspectives, because the strict madhabites have limited our ability to utilize our deen and further a life or furthering the solutions of Islam within life. And also, unfortunately, from the other side, anybody says whatever he says, like two hadith and khalas, that's it. You start basically giving fatwas left and right. I think the movement that want to push a little bit more leniency in ijtihad need to have also some structure. So it's not basically any talib ilm who has 2 years of knowledge, he's still barely speaking Arabic, start giving fatwas because he has a mic and a Facebook account, right? So that's this is what I believe. But again, it's something that the Ummah has to converge upon. It's not necessarily I'm right or wrong. I'm just going to propose something though to the Ummah, inshallah.
How about the idea that you have certain groups, maybe Sufi groups, or let's just say, for example, the whole Sheikh Hamza Yusuf situation, because he's part of the Trump administration, that Hizb ut-Tahrir will take a totally different approach, but you got the Sufis taking a different approach. So how do you kind of reconcile that in this sort of day and age? Because it's hard to kind of bring the Ummah together, even like not just on a fiqh standpoint, but also on political decisions, if that makes sense. So how will we actually move forward, if that makes sense?
Yeah, beautiful question. And that's what I'm saying, that the whole concept of convergence has to happen. It's not as if basically we're going to be able to take all what the 6 movements have proposed and we can mix them together, because there's contradictions, as you said, and as our colleague over here also have just mentioned. So there has to be somehow I always give this example before I continue. If you bring basically some metals together and some glass together and you throw them in a bag, you're not going to make an iPhone, right? So you need to take the metal and you need to design it well to fit with the glass and to fit with the other layers of the. So you can't just basically grab the 6 proposals of all the 6 movements and just mix it together. It's not going to fit together. So without a doubt, I think there are certain things that from the Sufi movement that the Ummah has to reject, and for sure, aligning yourself basically with the Fir'aun of today, saying I'm the advisor of that person and that serves Islam is something that every Muslim should reject outright. That's my view, at least. So, inshallah, the Ummah will converge on the haqq. Same thing with Hizb ut-Tahrir. I don't think that anything that Hizb ut-Tahrir says you should take for granted. I think they do have mistakes and they have lots of issues, and that means basically you need to be very selective on what you choose to take from the 6 movements, and you have to follow the dalil. You have to follow what's the criteria of truth when you're mixing things together. Because when you do have a final product, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give the tawfiq to the person with the purest heart that's going to help the Ummah the Ummah to basically revive again in this 15th century Hijri. Every century there's a revival, and and behind every revival are basically men and women who have pure hearts that push the Ummah toward the right convergence or point of convergence, inshallah.
I wanted to ask you quickly, because recently Sheikh Hamza Yusuf had this kind of internal event at Zaytuna College where he gave an outline of why he's joined the Trump administration. I only got this a few days ago, and apparently it's because he said that the circle that he's a part of, by law, the government can't actually influence what they, I guess, say and talk about. And within that small group of people that he's a part of, there are some academics that are very kind of far right people that have connections overseas. So I think his technique or tactic is to influence them in order to, I don't know, propagate a better perception of Islam, or maybe even, I don't know, convert
That's
one
what
of
I
them. So
assumed
just
from
get
the
that
beginning.
experience. I guess maybe they haven't had a dialogue properly with someone that's, part of the scholarly tradition from Islamic standpoint. So I think that's what Sheikh Hamza Yusuf's angle is. But what's your take on that angle?
Yeah, so I don't believe basically the issue is with having a position in itself. Unfortunately, it's really what you're saying, what you're representing, and the question is basically: is Hamza Yusuf saying the truth and the full truth in front of the public? So Musa alayhi salam, when he met with Fir'aun, he asked Fir'aun, "Okay, let's meet up in the Yawm al-Zina, in the biggest day, national holiday within the Fir'aun base or ancient Egyptian basically calendar, right?" So everybody was gathering. It's like the NBA finals. Everybody's on TV. Tens of millions of people are watching, and he made the pure claims about the truth about the universe. At the end of the day, that he's a messenger sent by God, and people must believe that he is as such, and then and so forth, basically. So the question is he doing that? We believe that there's lots of watering down and dilution of the message happening from certain individuals.
I can believe that too.
Yeah, the likes of Hamza Yusuf, to be honest, and be very frank. I'm not very shy in pointing things out, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took a covenant from the ulama. وَإِذْ أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِيثَاقَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ لَتُبَيِّنُنَّهُ لِلنَّاسِ وَلَا تَكْتُمُونَهُ. Allah have taken a covenant from the people, from the scholars of the Muslimin, and even the scholars before, of the Jews and Christians, that they must clarify it to the people and never hide a bit of the deen. So when we see a person, unfortunately, was followed by thousands of youth specifically, and tens of thousands of people in general, and he's making statements that kind of dilute the message and give a wrong perception of what Islam is, and being American first, and being Western, and being as if the Muslim Ummah now there's an American.
That's a good point,
Ummah.
man.
All these issues are problematic. So it's not about basically taking a specific position, to be honest, or being able to advise the non-Muslimin or influence them. We all want to influence all people, Muslims and non-Muslims, toward the haqq. So I wouldn't. It's a mute point. That's not the point.
I think politics. I'm not really a big fan of politics as such, but it's another area for discussion anyway. It's a big grey area. You want to add?
I wanted to ask, because, for example, I feel that what you're kind of alluding to as well, you may not have explicitly said it, but it's just the idea of, for me personally, living in the West, I used to be a very hardcore kind of Salafi, and then I'm actually, I'm still a big fan of Sheikh Hamza Yusuf.
Wait, you're not Hanafi?
Huh?
You're not Hanafi?
No, I'm Hanafi. No, as in, I used to be. When I go into the deen, I was hardcore Salafi, and then the way that I viewed Islam was very unforgiving. It's either one or black or white kind of thing. And then I guess when I really go into Sheikh Hamza Yusuf's material, because the Salafis say the Sufis are deviants, so you're just okay, stay away from these people, Sheikh Yaqubi and stuff. And then once you get into it, they're okay, they actually have dalil for what they're saying, right? So then you get into it, and then you experience a different kind of dimension of Islam, I guess. So I guess where I've come now, I'm Hanafi, I'd say I'm Ash'ari, but from my standpoint, my perspective is that I'm on the same boat as you. Just view all groups as having strengths, because I feel that there is now. I've kind of not gotten over the Sufi phase. I'm still I'd say I love the Sufi tradition, but I still see the weaknesses of it, and I'm just okay, this is where Salafism would kind of assist Sufism, but I feel that how we've kind of grown up. We still living in that age of all our parents came from Muslim lands. They emigrated to the West, so we just have bits and bobs of what they have. And then what the Salafi propaganda did was that they took all the website domains and stuff. So all we're bombarded with is Salafi propaganda online. That's all the dalil you see, or even on YouTube as well.
That's your first
so I guess for our
exposure to
generation, we're kind of maturing and seeing that okay, it's not so black and white. And I feel that that's the angle you're coming from. You can correct me if I'm wrong. That I guess we're in that generation where we have to just mature, understand that yes, there's Ashari, Maturidis, Atharis. We can't just view, because I know a lot of staunch Atharis that are like, okay, you guys, Asharis are, I don't know if you're even Ahl Sunnah or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But then even from big scholars, I see big Athari scholars who actually I respect a lot. When they talk about Ashari Aqidah, they kind of, I've seen one, I'm not going to mention the name, but it's very popular. He just said, oh yeah, Asharis, they just dipped and dabbed and they take reason over revelation. I'm like, dude, like the first thing you open up is, you take revelation first, you know what I mean? So I guess that's the stage that our generation is heading towards. We're just trying to mature and see groups for what they are and not necessarily see things so in an unforgiving kind of black and white manner. Would you say that's the phase that we're heading towards as a ummah, or we should be heading towards?
Yeah, I like the second statement. I think we should be. And inshallah, as I said, basically from an I3 perspective, we're trying to push toward that direction where people can, like I always tell my students, I'd love to have on one table a Tablighi, an Ikhwani, a Salafi, a Tahariri, whatever I missed, basically, all together in one table, not just as if they're guests, we're brothers, we're one ummah. We need to stop thinking that our labels will make us in Jannah or take us to Jannah. Our labels will not even help us a single bit on the Day of Judgment. Our a'mal, and only our a'mal, will basically be on the scale. There's nothing else. So the issues that basically people are always fighting over who has the pure i'tiqad and the purest i'tiqad is very, unfortunately, is very troubling. And it's very, very wrong and very ignorant. The person with the purest i'tiqad will have his behavior exemplify that in his everyday life. When we see the Muslims suffering in Kashmir, when we see the Muslims suffering in Palestine, in every single area of the world, what are you doing to the Ummah? What are you doing to the Ummah? What is the role of the Mahdi, by the way? Who's going to come at the end of times, and I believe we're living in the times, is to unify the Ummah and bring back Khilafah. He's not a guy who's going to basically say, well, look, I have the purest aqidah, and I'm sitting in my little mosque, and people basically will follow me there. No, that's subhanAllah. It's not like that. Forget al-Mahdi. Look at the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. Look at the Rasul sallam. Were they people who basically were always just showing off that I have the i'tiqad of this, I own the manhaj of this? And this is very troubling. And I'm not just critiquing here based on the Salafi movement. I think everybody falls into the same category. Whether you're Tablighi, Tahriri, everybody believes that I have the right formula and therefore I'm special. And I always tell my students, I want this to be heard by the Ummah, that there's a desire inside the human being to want to be unique and special. We love to feel like that. We love to. What is the first disease and what's the first sin ever that was conducted that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala told us about? It's Iblis' refusal of bowing down to Adam. Why? Because he wanted to be unique and special. He's like, whoa, I'm losing my status here. I used to be number one. I used to be the one. I used to be the guy with the angels, and now Allah's telling me to basically kind of bow down to this dude. I'm not going to do that. I'm losing my uniqueness and my special status. People need to understand that this is a form of shirk. Wallahi al-azim, it's a form of shirk. It's a form of shirk. Now, I'm not going to go and comment the minor shirk, but major shirk. I want people to basically think for themselves. But if you want the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you need to humble yourself. You need to understand that you're nothing. You need to understand that you worship Allah and Allah have created you from nothing and you're nothing. And you're going to go back to nothing. So if the human being is going to just follow his desires or her desires by wanting to be unique and special and give labels that I am the true Muslim, I belong to the safe sect, I am the one with the... Ya akhi, a'udhu billahi, wallahi, we're nothing. Wallahi al-azim, we are nothing. Wallahi. And if we don't break this disease from our heart, we're going to continue to be divided, and that's going to be our weakness.
So yeah, look, a couple of questions, a couple of topics that came into my mind as again first of all, back towards sort of the fiqh and aqidah sort of point. Well, like we both come from cultures where our parents migrated to this country and they were sort of taken on Western values, Western cultural values and things. And sometimes we get asked a lot of questions that are actually fiqh related, and there's valid difference of opinion, but when you look deeper, it roots from an aqidah issue. So, for example, like when you look at the Mu'tazila, right, they take the aqidah from their aql, right? They take it from the intellect. So what sounds good or what feels good or, things like that. They don't take it from revelation. So sometimes, for example, I might receive a question from some family that, is it okay to hang up pictures on the wall or is it bad to not fast? But then, like, it just, in reflection, I think, hold on, what do you mean by bad? As in, what's your definition of bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of aqidah, as in where I'm trying to go with this is that in a practical point of view, in a practical sense, with our families, in our communities, how do we sort of, discuss or educate, I think, people like from our backgrounds who don't really have much education in Islam, they don't, because it really comes down to like, they don't really know who Allah is. They're really sort of, instead of worshipping Allah, you're worshipping your nafs. Tanzim, do you want to add to it or?
Yes.
Like,
because we
come from more Bangladeshi background, so I resonate with Rahmat in the sense that we've had experiences where I feel the older generation, because I've been in Bangladesh, I feel that with the 1971 war, I guess Bangladesh in general didn't have faith in, I guess, religion or Islam, because they feel like, okay, look what the Pakistani brothers did to us. But in that process, when they immigrated out to the West, they've sort of lost the deen in the process. So, and let's be real, like they immigrate to the West to get a better job, which is fine, but it's very dunya oriented. So in the process of that, when that kids and everything,
that comes into their aqidah,
then
right?
yeah, the kids go through schooling, alhamdulillah, like I guess Allah guided us to the deen in the process. But then when you're still experiencing or having encounters with the older generation, uncles and aunties, what's problematic is that, as Rahmat was saying, that they only asking these like fiqh questions, but they don't have the aqidah in check.
The thing is, they ask fiqh questions. The purpose, right, the inner intention is to take what suits them, right?
Yeah.
The thing is, when you're doing that, you're taking what's compatible with your nafs. You're not taking it. So essentially, you're not worshipping Allah. You're worshipping your nafs, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I get it. And that, so I'm trying to connect basically where, like, how did you connect that?
Yeah,
to
it's a big puzzle, right? We're trying to figure stuff out too.
I guess where can we take it? Like where do we go from there?
How do you make the Sharia practical without compromising it?
Yeah, well, see, the Sharia is practical. The issue is basically that sometimes either we don't understand it or we don't understand how to basically extract the hukum, the practical. The hukum Sharia, by definition, is the practical command, the ruling that has practical ramification. Okay, it's a ruling upon a practical aspect of human behavior. So that's number one. Number two is basically sometimes because don't forget we're living in a non-Islamic context, and the regular Islamic answers might be difficult, just difficult. I always say basically to my students that we're fish outside the water. So if the fish is trying to ask, well, how do I live? Well, you're outside the water. You need water for that. So when the Sharia comes and says that usury is haram, riba is haram, and people can't find a different means to buy a house except through a riba-based solution, people are not going to be comfortable. They're going to say it's unpractical. So that's the issue. The issue is that sometimes it's not. It's either ignorance of the hukum shari itself, so people make it difficult upon themselves, especially because they just don't know. SubhanAllah, I'm trying to get an example. Basically, right here, sometimes, yeah. So let's say somebody doesn't know that, for example, wiping over the socks is allowed. And at work, every single time they need to make a wudu, they need to go and take their socks off, their shoes off in the bathroom of the in front of their peers and coworkers. It makes them feel uncomfortable. It pushes lots of people to not pray. and they just go back home and they pray Dhuhr and Asr basically at home. So that's just because they were ignorant of the practicality of the Sharia that made things, that gave certain exceptions for certain scenarios in life. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, as I said, is because of the life we're living is not an Islamic life. The Sharia says strictly that usury is haram. Usury is haram. And then most people basically see this type of command as, now here from a
Impractical.
perspective, impractical. Yeah. So it's not that the Sharia is impractical. It's just we're not living Islam. That's the second piece. So it's not about basically how we can explain it, or it's Mu'tazila versus non-Mu'tazila, or is it basically can we take the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and translate it intellectually to others? Well, we're not living Islam. If we go and start living in Islam or in Islamic context, and which is not even available in our own countries, right? Like even in our own, Islamic countries, it's not available because all these countries are secular in nature. It's always going to basically seem to the layman that the Sharia has shortcomings and the Sharia is not practical. And that's why at the end of the day, basically, Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what did he say? He says, جاء الإسلام غريبا أو بدأ الإسلام غريبا وسيعود غريبا كما بدأ. That Islam came as a stranger. It's a strange message. It's like, what are you talking about? What do you mean, O Muhammad, that we can't, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, can't worship multiple idols? What are you talking about? So he came with things that basically, negated the status quo, and people didn't get it. Only a few individuals in society would be able to understand the depth of the message and the real solutions and how they fit in life like a glove in a person's hand. And those people are supposed to be working to change society life and state based upon the Islamic commands, and build an Islamic society that all these solutions that Islam have presented will really be practical. Not just practical, they'll be excellent and amazing too. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحُ وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. When the victory and the opening, or the great opening, if you want to call it, which is when Islam not just becomes independent and has a state, that state becomes a successful model for society. And in our terms today, basically for the global human race. When Islam gets built today in a way that becomes, everybody wants to be Muslim. The Scandinavian wants to be Muslim. The Australian wants to be Muslim. The African wants to be Muslim. The Latino in Latin America wants to be a Muslim, because of the successful project of a specific society somewhere around the globe. Probably is going to be in the Middle East. Once that happens, people are going to flock to Islam because the solutions are amazing. The solutions are profound. The solutions are just mesmerizing. But within a non-Islamic context, things are going to look, oh, this doesn't make sense. What are you talking about? What do you mean I can't get a loan from the bank to buy a house? Everybody buys it this way. This is the only way to do it. So the seeming unpracticality is not because we're not communicating right. It's just I don't believe we can convince every single person, every single layman, of the practicality of the Sharia outside a real model and real example. And that's why those who see it need to get busy in trying to build that model instead of basically trying to convince people and believing in something that's abstract in nature. Most people are not abstract. I'm a computer scientist. We deal with abstract all the time. I'm very comfortable with abstract things. Most people are not. So when you try to convince mama and daddy and auntie and uncle and all the different characters in your family about the practicality of Islam, they're just not going to see it. It's not their shortcoming. It's not your shortcoming. It's really the unavailability of a real model that's practical, that can be sensed, that can be touched, that can be felt, to convince the populace. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that once this real model becomes very successful, the people en masse going to be Islam, going to join Islam. People en masse. So, our message today is very strange because it must be strange. That's how it started, and that's how it's, alhamdulillah, returning.
I wanted to ask a slightly different topic, but because you run the I3 Institute and you mentioned that its aim is to produce leaders, it does seem that from my perspective, going about my life, that there isn't enough Muslim leaders in the community. There aren't people that are standing up. Like we see people, like we hear, there's some guy and he's gone to a madrasa system and he's studied overseas and he's come back. but we don't see them kind of take, maybe like a Hamza Yusuf sort of route, like be that leader in the community where people can look
Public
up to,
figure.
and even they're possibly a public figure, but doesn't necessarily have to be a public figure, just leader in the community,
Influence,
doing
right?
is doing active steps. But it just seems like there's a lot of people going through a madrasa system, but we're not producing leaders. Like, what's your sort of take on that? Do you feel that that's the case, or maybe I'm misrepresenting people, or do you feel that we are lacking in that aspect in terms of not just like Islamic studies, but also dabbling with academic studies, or any attacks from Islam in a whole?
100%. You're right. I mean, like, it's not,
Could I add to your question? Sorry to cut you off,
Sure.
Sheikh. Could we, as in, what's your take on also in terms of developing people who can really push the ummah forward to discussing really challenging or uncomfortable topics, like, for example, differences of opinion in creed, things that people get really, really fired up and staunch about, like, for example, wasila, istighatha, awliya, and, is the Prophet ﷺ alive in his qabr or not? And, you know what I mean? Like, how do we get into really, really deep, sort of tangible, because that's where I think, in my vision, that's where the most growth for this ummah is going to be, like getting out of our comfort zone and talking about things that we, generally we just talk with our bosom friends in the back of the mosque, you know what I mean, on our private WhatsApp threads. We need this to be public. We need to sort of champion it and, bring it out into the front line of the whole Muslim ummah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll take one by one, I guess. They're related points, so it's good to deal with them together. So without a doubt, basically, we have a lack of leadership, without a doubt. And leadership does not basically get created in a vacuum. SubhanAllah, when I was young, I was maybe like 19. I asked one of my teachers, give me 1 second. So I asked one of my teachers when I was 19. Again, one of my most beloved teachers, I guess. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him. He was a great leader himself. And I told him, like, how do you become a leader? And he shocked me with his answer. Like, I didn't expect the answer. I'm not sure. Maybe it might be obvious for others, but I personally was shocked. He told me to be a leader, because I thought he was going to tell me, well, go study this or go read that book or whatever. He told me to be a leader, you need to be around leaders. And subhanAllah, after I did my management studies at the grad level in the MBA, and then we took courses on leadership specifically and so forth, and if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills and I continue my doctorate in management, I would be focusing on leadership. We learned that. We learned that basically such human behavioral qualities can only be transferred from one person to another through like more of an apprenticeship, right? Like it's something that a person gets inspired by others. You can't build a leader in a vacuum. You can't tell a person, go read these books and you'll become a leader. Leadership is like an art. Arts, you can't go and tell people basically read this book and you'll know how to draw and you know how to paint and you know how to do things that are artistic in nature. Arts are learned through imitation. Leadership is an art. Therefore, leadership will only be learned through imitation. So the minute you have a leader around you, only a leader can generate other leaders. And, as a person who's worked in the corporate world, and I'm still basically working in the corporate world, and I'm at more of a managerial level myself, alhamdulillah, I can tell you basically all big corporations will focus on creating leaders within their businesses and corporations by attaching people to current leaders. So the best leader is the one who can actually develop other leaders. This is a fact in corporate life. So it must be a fact within our ummah. In terms of being able to create people who are open-minded, that can have the ability and the quick wit and the acumen of discussing issues that are uncomfortable to others, is part of what a leader does. You can't be a leader and not be in the uncomfort zone. What makes you a leader is basically being able to push yourself to be in the uncomfortable zones. So whether it's intellectual in nature and aqidah related, like the suggestions you've mentioned, or even basically other things like political activism, being able to secure the community's interest, or basically countering Islamophobia, whatever challenges. What makes a leader is he or she leads others in the most challenging questions at hand for society that are practical in nature and relevant and sensitive. So, and without a doubt, basically, just to kind of maybe finish my answer for the first point, we at I3 believe that our purpose is to create leaders. And how do we do that? We do that by basically making sure we develop leaders who will in turn themselves within the structure, within the structure of the institute, also develop other leaders themselves.
Yeah, back to sort of, I'm just thinking like, I want to sort of take this more down a practical visionary sort of route. So, you know, for the next maybe 10, 20, maybe 30 years, you know, what I would like to see the Ummah moving towards is sort of alignment on, you know, when we come back to groups and structures and things like Islam, of course, is a perfect religion, right? Like Allah says, Surah Ma'idah, Al-Yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati. Today I've perfected your religion, right? So Islam is a perfect, comprehensive religion, right? It gives us broad usul in the Sharia. It's applicable in every single time and context and society. What I want to see the Ummah moving towards is a holistic, comprehensive alignment within a framework in terms of methodologies and principles in Deen. So that's on a really sort of broad overview sort of level. The thing that we need to move towards is specifically getting into deep, you know, discussions amongst scholars, aligning on the same page on things in terms of principles and bringing it down to, you know, general lay people. I don't know, like, what's your sort of take on that? Like, how do you sort of see the Muslim Ummah, you know, doing that sort of tangible work? And I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything, Tansim?
Yeah. So it's without doubt. I mean, I heard an American politician say that China has a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, and a 50-year plan. And subhanAllah, anybody who's strategic would basically plan that far in such a structured manner. You should always basically have a short-term plan, medium length plan, and a long-term plan. And I see the Ummah basically in 40 years being able to make that jump. So that's the hope, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised us victory as an Ummah, and the Rasul told us every single century, by the end of it, there will be some sort of victory, right? Rasul said in a hadith that was narrated by Abu Dawood in his Sunan, that على رأس كل 100 عام يبعث الله مجددا يجدد لهذه الأمة أمر دينها أو كما قال, meaning that Rasulullah said that every 100 years, and for sure we're counting from a Hijri perspective, Allah will send someone to revive the deen of the Ummah and the understanding of the Ummah of its deen. So we're right now in the middle of the century, so I believe this is a phase of a hot discussion and lots of back and forth. And I would push everybody to start discussing how can we get to this level. SubhanAllah, I believe basically we've hit ground zero, to be honest. We've hit rock bottom. And I believe rock bottom is strictly and specifically the Arab Spring, which failed miserably in terms of the outcome. But for sure there was lots of gains too. We're not here to discuss maybe the Arab Spring, but I believe in a post-Arab Spring world, the Ummah, the scholars of the Ummah, the intellectuals of the Ummah, the poets of the Ummah, the artists of the Ummah, the young activists of the Ummah, the podcasts of the Ummah should all get together and start a discussion. We need to have an Ummah-wide discussion. What is the way forward? And bit by bit, inshallah, as I said, the Ummah will converge in one specific way. Okay? So without a doubt, I have this belief. Now, how do we do that? I'm going to give you at least an example. I mean, like, the question to me basically, how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us lots of examples of earlier nations in the Quran. Some of them basically were the nations of the prophets, some of them were not. And how did these prophets alayhim salam basically go about carrying the da'wah and changing society? But also, there's no problem. قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, Allah says basically travel within the lands and see the signs of Allah and reflect upon the history of the nations and the people before you. So, it might be relevant to us in the 21st century or the 15th century Hijri to look at maybe a more relevant example from a practical perspective of how nations became free. We are a colonialized nation at the end of the day. We were colonialized in World War I. We're still under the colonization of the West. It started with the British and the French. And today, basically, it continues with them, and in addition to the Americans and the Russians in specific. And we're still colonized. We don't have an independent nation anywhere in the world. We don't have an independent Islamic nation today. How can we get to that goal? We need to have a vision as an ummah. We need to have a vision. We need to have political emancipation. And for us to basically get that, what is a good example? I believe basically the American example is a good example to look at. We're not basically trying to imitate the Americans in their deen or in their secular way of life or their liberal thoughts. I'm talking about basically how did they mesh together? How did they form networks across the 13 colonies to create a movement and to create a public opinion within every single household in these 13 colonies had people who belonged to this wider movement within you want to call it the American Ummah, that called for liberty and for freedom of these 13 colonies from the British, and ended up in 1776 with the leadership of Washington and his bunch and his crew to kick the British out of the Americas and to have real American emancipation and independence, and then basically created a United States of America. People back then during that time used to basically be called the Sisters of Liberty and the Brothers of Liberty. They had networks, they had halaqat, they had secret meetings, they had agendas, they had leaflets, they spread their ideas and their vision of an independent American country. I call today, and this is my call, that the Ummah should start building networks across the body of the Ummah, from Australia to Alaska, so from the two corners of the world, for such a vision of independence and being able to revive this Ummah that's been sleeping for a long time, to become again خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرَجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ.
So do you think that would ideally start with the ulama, and what sort of structure or hierarchy do you see forming in this Ummah? Because, of course, at the end of the day, the ulama are our leaders, right?
Yes. So let me tell you, be very frank. The ulama are the most tested people in the world. And therefore, basically, because they're most tested, the word alim, unfortunately, gets given to anybody who has information. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. Meaning, basically, really the alim, the word ulama was used. The ulama, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defined them as those who fear Allah the most. Okay, it's not about information. It's not about basically having PhD in Sharia.
Right.
It's about basically having a person who really know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in depth. And that knowledge of Allah, basically, if it's real, it becomes real fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It makes the human behavior of that person, that alim, becomes productive. So there would be people who it must always start with ulama, without doubt. So the easy answer is yes. But is it going to be all the ulama of the world going to basically cooperate together to form that solution? I don't believe so. I believe the ulama. I think ulama, minority of the ulama in every corner of the world would basically move in that direction. But also, don't forget, what's the name of your podcast, akhi?
Boys in the Cave.
Okay, were they ulama? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Fityatun amanu bi rabbihim." Fitya meaning basically youngsters. Youngsters, could be teenagers, could be they're youngsters who really had a firm and hard belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It made them actually go and sit in a little cave and leave civilization from that perspective and even die for the sake of their belief. Now, Rasul basically says, "Nusirtu bil-shabab." I was victorious with the youth. So it doesn't have to be a big bunch of ulama. It has to be few ulama that lead the ummah, specifically the youth in the ummah, and give them, basically empower them to have the right understanding and vision of the sharia to create change within certain areas of the ummah where those geographic places become a point of, or we can call it nuqtat irtikaz, that area of basically where the Islam can have a rebirth.
So I guess like we could have ulama, like a council of ulama from all over the world representing all their different respective backgrounds, and then we can move forward to like discussing, like the issues about manhaj, aqidah, usul, how we're going to structure the deen and feed it down to the lay people. And then that's when, education, this is just the process that I'm seeing. It starts with education. Once the ulama are on the same page in terms of how we understand and approach Islam, right, as a comprehensive, perfect, true religion,
Yeah.
then it just becomes about tarbiyah, transforming people, education, bringing everyone onto the same page. You know what I mean?
Just
Like
to
organizing everything.
add to what you said, Ramit, like what I've sort of observed in Sydney is that there's that real lack of getting in touch with Islamic knowledge in the sense, like there are obviously institutions, alhamdulillah, many institutions in Sydney, but I'm talking about making like a thing like knowing your aqidah. It's not really there. Like you kind of just grow up in like, oh yeah, Islamic studies, just go study, but it's not specifically, you're not taught to be like, oh, you have to learn your Islamic aqidah, like that's your main thing. We're sort of just kind of left to find it for ourselves. And not only that, the other issue that on a community level is that a lot of the funding and a lot of organizations, the ones that aren't forward thinking, like what you just mentioned, that we need to have a 10, 50-year plan or so on, these sort of certain people, I'm not going to say everyone, like alhamdulillah, there's obviously good people trying to do good works for the deen, but a lot of them are very self-centered. They want to just get into positions of power, and what happens is that there's a misallocation of funds, so we can't really utilize or be efficient with the funds we have in order to help spread the deen locally. So those are sort of like big inhibiting factors in sort of when it comes to directing the deen in a positive way. And afterwards, for the normal kind of Muslim, you're left to kind of figure it on your own. So as you mentioned, me personally, and this is kind of like a Said Nursi sort of approach, he also talked a lot about education, right? And I feel that like it's just got to be down packed from a young age growing up. Like it's just got to be that thing that you have to get, like Aqidah, as you Ramet mentioned earlier, like if aunties and uncles are coming to you with fiqh questions, like
will solve their issues, just basic tahawi, bro. Like 2-week course on tahawi, like they would.
Yeah, so there's that as well. Like I even know people that adopt certain ideologies from, be it from secularism, kind of import it into deen and make it a mix mash of things like that. So it becomes really problematic. You can't really kind of progress as an ummah, right? So I feel that on a larger scale, in a community sense, on the grassroots level, if we can have that allocation of funding allocated in the right way, and also have that focus on education, or build institutions that can cater to that. Yeah. I think if we can start that all around the world, not just Sydney, I'm sure this is a problem all over the world, that can sort of be that connecting factor.
We could make a global WhatsApp thread.
But that could be like one big, that's just me personally, that's what I've sort of experienced and what I, inshallah, hopefully can assist in some way. But would you say that's a good sort of starting point as well?
Well, see, okay, so let me comment. Education is kind of really kind of the transfer of information. I like the word transformation. Transformation is a better word than education, right? So to be honest, what we need to have such a result that we're dreaming about is to have the self-development of the Muslim individual in a way where when you see that person praying, he's gonna be, mashallah, you would think he is with Jama'at al-Tabligh. His prayers so calm, his prayers so even long sometimes, and he's in super khushu'. But you're gonna see the same individual maybe when you see him basically behaviorally, he's gonna have an amazing akhlaq that you think he is like a Sufi. When you see him speak, let's say from an intellectual perspective or maybe from a political perspective, you'd think this guy is with Hizb ut-Tahrir. When you see this person active in the community, you'd think he is from the Ikhwan al-Muslimin or Jama'at Islami. When you see this person, when he starts maybe giving a lecture about the ulum, you'd think he's a scholar. When you see this person is really kind of giving, referring always to the Quran and Sunnah with evidences, you'd think he's a Salafi. We want a person that is well-rounded like that. The I3 Institute is trying to build people with these 6 features. We're trying to build people that have all the good characteristics of the 6 movements to build a well-rounded, fully functional, and transformational individual, a person who transformed and can transform others, a leader in the community. I believe when we start building these people across the ummah, we're going to build lots of influentials that can have an impact in every single corner of the geography or the Islamic geography worldwide. These people, once they get to that level, they're going to be able to mesh together. For sure, there will be core scholars that lead this type of Islamic work, but for sure, the body of this work would be mostly youngsters who have the skill set, the agility, the adaptability, the quick wit in being able to adapt within their environments wherever they are. You know what I'm saying? So this is what I believe. I believe this is a big project. Alhamdulillah, we've already started. We do have a alhamdulillah head start in actually starting working with this and preaching this to others, so others can even get a head start themselves. And I'm very hopeful that within the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see lots of the fruits of this type of projection and proposal to the Ummah, inshallah.
I think one thing I want to add, something it's as an example of the Ummah moving forward on a particular case. Like we're talking about discussing sort of uncomfortable topics that eventually clarify a lot of sort of masail sort of issue. Like for example, the definition of bid'ah, right? Salafis will say the Mawlid is a bid'ah, Sufis will say Mawlid is a sunnah or it's a bid'ah hasana, but those rulings come from the principle of and the definition of bid'ah, right? So I think that's one example of that I can see the Muslim Ummah moving forward on, is like developing definitions and usul and uniting upon that, because once we unite upon that will clarify.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't believe it's an issue of formulating definitions. I think it has to do with respect. I think I gave a lecture maybe 3 years ago in a leadership retreat, and discussing basically the adab of difference of opinion. It's like I'll give you an example. Little kids when they're like 3 or 4 or 5 might fight over little things that you as an adult think it's silly. You know what I'm saying? Once those two youngsters who are 5 years old grow up to become, let's say, 12 or 14, they're going to stop basically fighting over those little things. Why? Because they gained the maturity. The Ummah today is like a little child. And it's natural. It's very natural. I'm not being demeaning to the Ummah. I'm not a person who looks down at the Ummah. This is my Ummah and I'm this Ummah. Our Ummah went out of, subhanAllah, after World War One, literally our deen and our understanding of the deen has almost evaporated. So may Allah subhanahu bless all these movements from last century. They re-gave back the Ummah its aqidah. The Ummah today basically is a Muslim Ummah, by name and by faith. But it is very young in terms of its understanding of the Sharia.
Yeah, I agree.
So the more we mature, SubhanAllah, I'll give you a real example. To be honest, I have lots of Salafi friends, alhamdulillah, who now, alhamdulillah, are less, they're more willing to cooperate with others. Okay, bit by bit, lots of them say, look, we need to cooperate with the non-Ahl Sunnah, so because we have a bigger enemy and so forth. But some of them basically even got to the stage where now they respect the others. Like, look, we have a difference. We believe we're right. But the others have a real dalil behind what they're saying. We differ with them. We agree with the strength of their dalil. So they're getting to that maturity level. Now, there are a few individuals.
Yeah.
Bit by bit, you're going to see that become a little bit more the mainstream. So the more our ummah engages in discussion and discourse, and the more our ummah basically gains more knowledge and understanding of Islam, is going to get to that level where, these little things that we used to fight over 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and gave us lots of scars, whether it's like the bid'ah thing or like how short or long your pants are, or you shave your mustache or not, they will go away just because you're growing, just because you're growing, just because you're maturing. So we don't need to invent anything to resolve these issues, because they're not issues. They are actually non-issues. The only reason they are issues is because of our limited maturity in understanding the fiqh and the usul and the deen in general.
Right. If I understand correctly, I see your point. I think, like what you're talking about now, like as the Ummah is a little kid, so, it's about enculturing respect and that in the Ummah? And then do you see like eventually moving to a point where we can have productive discussions and dialogues about this? Or do you see that when you say it's just going to eventually fall off, do you mean to say that it's just not even relevant? Or
no, I don't.
That makes sense.
We will be able to do it basically in a very respectful and mature way. Meaning, basically, we'll sit together on the same table. We'll discuss basically we should celebrate Al-Mawlid or not, and what maybe actions basically constitute legal type of celebrations, and maybe basically should we really call it celebrations? What does really the word celebration really mean? And just leave table basically with a big hug and kiss, and some of us basically go do their celebration, some of us basically kind of restrict our time within that day to just prayers and sunan as we see it fit.
Yeah, I think for me personally, it stems back to the fact that the Ummah don't have a 20-year vision or 50-year vision that you mentioned, because what I've realized is that we see that when, for example, when it's time to vote, when the voting season is on, then suddenly all these you see these fatwas on are you meant to vote or not, and then after the voting period is done, we don't actually know if everyone voted or not, but then the conversation doesn't come up until the next voting period. Then that's when all the discussions happen.
It's the same thing with
and
Mawlid.
Then like even for Eid, sighting the moon, starting Ramadan, all this sort of stuff, when starting Eid is like all these big heated discussions, and then it kind of goes away for the next like 11 months, and then it happens all over. Like there's no planning. Like, dude, just be local as a community or do whatever, but at least plan for it. Don't just like start talking about it when it just pops up, and right. Even with voting, like I understand there's, from what I've been told or what I've consulted, you're not meant to vote, and there's obviously opinions that you do. Whatever is the fatwa you take, the issue is that what do you do? Like, are you just going to engage with the system and that's it? Like, is your perception of moving the Ummah forward or moving the local community forward, you're just going to vote in a Muslim guy and that's it? Like, are they really going to help with the interests of the Muslim community? So I guess the crux of the issue is that on a community level, like if I'm talking about voting specifically here in Sydney, we should be having a plan like, look, if we are to get the rights for Muslims locally or do away with the CVE programs or whatever is inhibiting the Muslim community, we should have a plan in place. We should sit down and be like, we need to do X, Y, Z, and we need to put it into place. So
it's like how corporations do, right? Like what Sheikh was talking about, America. It just reminds me, correct me if I'm wrong, that ayah in Surah Tawbah, more or less, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم والذين كفروا بعضهم أولياء بعض. More or less, إن تفعلوه تكون فتنة في الأرض وفساد كبير. More or less that, the context behind the ayat that Allah's talking about, the disbelievers, they're allies of each other, right?
Yes, for sure.
Unless you do the same thing, then there's going to be fitna in this world. And like when I just reflect on that, like kuffar, Allah, it's about adopting best practice, right? When kuffar do it, there's fitna fasad in the world. But when we do the same thing, there's khair in the world because we have iman, right? So it's about adopting best practice, and it's just something that popped into my head. Thought I'd add it.
But what's your take? Do you feel that we're in that position that we may, sit down on a table with community leaders and be it academics or
we just
even
have to start
scholars,
a global WhatsApp group, put all the scholars in it, and that's how we start. Get some
because even like because I'm on Twitter and I'm in the Muslim Twitter sphere, I see. Like I was having a chat with someone about this. I see very intelligent Muslim brothers who are very practicing, and I know they're practicing. Even though they may not explicitly show that they have the Sharia knowledge, they do have knowledge in other fields, be it, academia, racism, in different spheres, because those fields of study help us to address local issues, be it, with, there's a white supremacy coming about, how do we deal with those issues, or which groups to align with. So these guys have their head is in the right place when it comes to these issues. So I see on Twitter, there's already divisions in place. So there's a slightly Muslim person who we know who studied Sharia and stuff. They're voicing their opinion about certain issues that may not necessarily be their expertise in issues, be it in academia, right? So they've already defined themselves as, yes, I'm Muslim. My opinion is from the Muslim camp, and whoever doesn't share those thoughts that I do, they aren't in the Muslim camp, and it's causing these unnecessary divides and divisions, right? So in my back of my mind, I'm just always thinking, if these guys sat together and had all these hatred out of the way and actually sat down together and thought about ideas, would be in a better place. So do you see yourself experiencing sort of dialogue and discussion in the next next decade even, or in the
Okay.
near future perhaps?
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about basically the time frame. I personally always worry about myself. I look at myself in the mirror and say, what are you doing to the ummah? So it's not about basically like 10 years. Like, to be honest, basically we can say it's 10 years today, and if we don't do the right work, it's not going to happen 10 years. It's 10 years basically we need to start so we can start counting. Excuse me. So two things you guys mentioned basically also show a sign of immaturity, right? Like when people can't sit together and they're labeling each other that you're this and you're this because of a feeling of superiority or just wanting to be special and unique, as I said earlier, that's a sign of a child. A child wants to basically stand out in the within the crowds, wants to feel special, wants to feel special by mommy and daddy, wants to be the subhanAllah, look at the Ikhwat Yusuf alayhi salam, because they felt that they were not the special ones. They hated him. There was envy. So we have this again. We're a little bit childish. Even our leaders are a little bit childish because they want to say, no, I am in the right manhaj and you're not.
Yeah.
And when you see people not communicating, again, it's a sign of kids.
Yeah.
Basically, they start fighting. Oh, don't the guy, and it's middle school stuff, right? So being able to have a mature discussion, being able to have respect difference, and actually really respect difference, and appreciate the other point of view, and being interested in the other point of view, and understand that we are one ummah, and therefore we need to actually work together, and we're on one boat, one ship, and if we're brothers first and foremost. All these human behavior that we don't exhibit shows immaturity.
I think that's a really Sorry, go on.
Oh no, the question is, how do we get there? So how do we basically when we start discussing these issues? These issues are the elephant in the room. We need to start discussing them. We need to always call out if imams or individuals, both imams or laymen, are divisive. We need to call them out. It's like, brother, this is not right. We need to basically be together. We can't afford being divided. See what I'm saying? So we need to create public opinion about certain core concepts. So whether respecting the differences, whether understanding that really what your behavior and your deeds is what's going to get you to Jannah, not your just pure i'tiqad and a pure label that you have. And subhanAllah, by the way, just I wanted to say this earlier. I'm going to say it now. From a Christianity perspective, as you know, Isa alayhi salam came to extend the message of Musa alayhi salam, to extend the Torah. So the Torah was still basically a holy book post Isa alayhi salam, even though he was a messenger, right? In addition to that, basically you have the gospel, you have the Injil, right? So what Paul did, and subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to punish him a huge punishment, is he separated the practical from the belief. He's like, if you believe if you believe in Jesus, you get salvation. You don't need to do any of the Sharia stuff. You don't need to do any of the practical.
Really? Subhanallah.
And we sometimes basically feel if we belong to this group, we have salvation. We have attained salvation. It's a Christian.
Right.
It's the Pauline, not even. I don't want to say Christian. It's a Pauline Christianity type of idea. Your group or your faith or your subscription to these specific masail that has to do with the aqidah is not going to take you to heaven. What's going to take you to heaven is your deeds. So the minute we understand that, we're going to grow in maturity, and we're going to be able to feel humble. We're going to feel humble. We're going to feel humble about ourselves, because like, okay, what did we do to the ummah, right? And that's going to drive us to basically put our hands together and love each other. To be honest, subhanAllah, being in a group, unfortunately, from those, I call them basically the 20th century or the 14th century Hijri movements. Unfortunately, there are lots of partisanship. There's lots of hate of the others. There's lots of self-affirmation,
self-righteousness, I think. Yeah.
I'm going to call it self-celebration, that we are the ones who are in the haqq. Habibi, like
pride.
About being in the haqq. It's like, what are we doing to our ummah? So we need to have a new movement in the ummah, new intellectual stream in the ummah that rejects this type of partisanship until it becomes a public opinion. It'll be shameful, it'll be aib, it'll be a taboo to say such things or to even feel such things. It's like racism, it's a taboo. We need to have this partisanship to become a taboo within our Islamic community. So if there's a sheikh or a big imam who's divisive and he thinks that he is on the right way, people are going to say, well, hey, what's wrong with you, man? What are you talking about? He's going to lose his support. He's going to lose his celebrity status. He's going to lose whatever. So there's a price to pay if you're going to engage in this really it's haram, to be honest, in these shameful acts.
That's definitely a good takeaway point. I think it's almost nearing the end of the episode, but we do want to ask you one big question before we wrap up the episode. This question we asked to all our guests. It's probably the hardest question people have come across. So I'll ask it now, inshallah.
Stressed here. I'm just kidding.
But so if you had the option to hang with 3 people in the cave, because boys in the cave, and they can't be prophets or Rasul Sallallahu or the Sahaba, because we'll just say for adab's sake they're already in the cave. But who else would you, in history, or it could be present time, 3 people you'd like to sit within a cave?
Could they be dead or alive?
They could be dead or alive,
Okay.
yeah. Like anyone, it could be scholars, activists, academics, whoever. Who's it really influenced you?
3 people, is it?
Yeah, 3 people.
Without a doubt, number 1 would be the Shaheed of the Ummah, Sayyid Qutb rahimahullah.
Allah.
Without doubt. That's number 2 basically would be Malcolm X.
MashaAllah.
Really?
And number 3, basically, it might surprise you, but it would be Taqiyuddin Nabhani.
Taqiyuddin Nabhani, rahimahullah.
Those 3 basically together, to be honest, would be my top 3. And they had lots of influence on my life. In that order, I guess I would say.
Imagine doing a podcast with Malcolm X, man. Boys in the cave would be number 1.
I was reading some people, the thoughts of who are from the academia space who've really studied Malcolm X. They would be like, if they really, if Malcolm X was here and he looked at how the Ummah approached political issues, he would just be like disappointed. But that's another discussion for another day. But Sheikh, you breezed through the 3 people like no tomorrow.
You had it prepared.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't do that. I guess I haven't prepared because I guess I love them, and may Allah bless all of them.
I mean, no, it's because we had guests in the past. They took like literally, they made us pause the episode, wait 15 minutes, come up with 3 because they had so many they couldn't pick from. So I thought I had this kind of situation, but mashallah. Yeah, like inshallah the Ummah moves forward, and I think there was a lot of takeaway points from this episode, alhamdulillah. A lot of new insights that I gained as well. And even with your institute, I3, it's dedicated to producing the Ummah's leaders. So inshallah, you get barakah from that, and jazakallah khair for...
If there's any sources for donation to his thing.
Oh yeah, so is there any links? I'll actually put it in the show notes, inshallah, like all the links to I3 Institute, inshallah. But was there any place where people could check out your content, Sheikh? Like, do you have like a Facebook page, Instagram?
If people wanted to donate at all as well.
Yeah, subhanallah. I mean, I haven't focused on myself as much. So we do have the institute's website and the institute Facebook page. There's also a very small YouTube channel that I have some of my lectures, very, very few, but I guess I'll send that to bi'idhnillah ta'ala. And
people can check it out. I watched, mashallah, it's very insightful. I watched the economics one, the comparison between the capitalist system and the Muslim economic system. So definitely a lot of good content. I'll link everything in the show notes, inshallah. So for the viewers.
Barakallah feekum, and I'm very happy to basically be part of this podcast. And again, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put the barakah in this and make this podcast one way to help revive this ummah and to open minds and open hearts and creates unity amongst all the Islamic factions, inshallah.
And this podcast really helps to get in touch with leaders and community figures and sheikhs like yourself, that we're all on the same page essentially, because we talked about during the episode that we want to move forward as an ummah, be on the same page, and alhamdulillah, so through this podcast we're able to connect with the right people.
Ameen. Barakallah feekum.
So from our listeners, thank you for giving us your attention. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email us at info@boysinthecave.com or find us on Facebook, and you can follow our journey through Instagram. Please leave a 5-star rating on iTunes, as that greatly helps us. That really does greatly help us. So give a review as well. Even if you don't have an iPhone, hop onto iTunes store, give us a review, because it really helps, with the rankings, inshallah. So that's our oxygen here at Boys and Cave, is your reviews, inshallah. So from our special guests, Sheikh Osta, my special new co-host Ramet, and myself, we wish you all the best. This is Tanzim signing off. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.